At my son's development launch in Vancouver, in front of 60 investors and 2 city councilors, he took my father's pocket watch from my hands and set it on the cocktail bar, like it was something the cleaning staff had left behind. "Old things make investors nervous, Dad," he said it quietly, almost kindly, the way you explain something to someone who keeps forgetting. Then he turned back to his crowd and laughed at whatever the man beside him had just said. My granddaughter Clara was standing beside me. She was 8 years old, and she'd been holding my hand all evening because the room was loud and full of strangers in expensive suits. She'd been excited about the watch. I'd told her in the elevator that her grandmother had kept it safe for 60 years, that it had belonged to my father, that one day it would belong to her. When my son set it on the bar without looking at it again, Clara's hand tightened in mine and then went very still. I didn't say a word. Anger expressed loudly is anger wasted. I'd learned that from Vera, and I wasn't about to forget it in a hotel ballroom in Coal Harbour. I reached past a tray of champagne flutes, picked up the watch, and slipped it back into my breast pocket. It sat against my chest the rest of the evening, warm and heavy, while my son gave his presentation and the investors applauded, and my granddaughter fell asleep against my shoulder in a corner chair. When I finally put Clara in a cab to her mother and drove back across the Lions Gate Bridge to North Vancouver, the city lights below me looked the way they always do in November. Cold, beautiful, indifferent. The rain started before I reached the highway. I drove the rest of the way home in the dark, the watch sitting on the passenger seat. That was the night I started to understand that Vera had known something I hadn't. She died 22 months before my son's party. Ovarian cancer caught too late, the way it almost always is. We had 7 months between diagnosis and the end, and Vera used every one of those months with the same quiet determination she'd brought to everything in her life. 40 years as a registered nurse, 41 years as my wife, and whatever this final thing was that I couldn't name yet. In her last week, she asked me to sit with her while the house was quiet. She held the pocket watch in both hands, running her thumb across the engraving on the back the way she'd always done. "When Clara is old enough," she said, "you give her this, not Oliver, you." I told her my son would want Clara to have it properly, at a birthday, at Christmas, with some kind of ceremony. "No." Her voice was still clear even then. "You give it to her yourself. Oliver will find a reason to put it away somewhere, and then it'll be gone." I thought she was being unfair. I thought grief and morphine were making her see things that weren't there. My son was difficult, sometimes, demanding, preoccupied with money. But he loved Clara. I was certain of that. "This watch holds more than time, Howard." She looked at me the way she'd always looked at me when she needed me to actually hear her. "It holds what I did for Oliver when he had nothing. Clara will need to know that someday, and she'll need what's inside." I started to ask what she meant, but she closed her eyes and the moment passed, and I didn't push. 3 days later, at 6 in the morning, with the winter light just beginning through the bedroom curtains, she was gone. I thought about those words sometimes in the months after. What I did for Oliver when he had nothing. But grief has a way of smoothing things over, and I let myself believe she'd meant something sentimental, the encouragement she'd given him, the belief she'd always had in him. I didn't think she'd meant something you could hold in your hands. Not until the night of the party. Not until I drove home in the rain and sat at my kitchen table at midnight with the watch in front of me and finally paid attention to the weight of it. I'd held that watch hundreds of times. I knew the weight of it the way you know, the weight of something you've carried your whole life. And sitting there under the kitchen light, turning it over in my hands, I could feel that something was different. It was heavier than it should have been. Not much, but enough. Vera had been a nurse, not a mechanic. But she'd spent 20 years volunteering with the Historical Society, cataloging donated objects, getting to know every restorer and craftsman in North Vancouver. She'd known people who understood the difference between what something appeared to be and what it actually was. My late wife had spent her last year planning something, while I wasn't paying close enough attention. Felix Bauer has a shop in Gastown on Water Street, 2 doors down from the steam clock. I've known him for 25 years. We met when I brought him a broken transit level from a job site, and he spent 40 minutes explaining its mechanism before he even asked what I wanted repaired. He's 73 now, with glasses thick enough to read a city plan at arm's length and hands that haven't shaken once in all the years I've known him. I walked in on a Tuesday morning with the watch in my coat pocket. He looked up from his bench, took one look at my face and said, "Sit down first." I set the watch in front of him, told him what had happened at the party, my son, the cocktail bar, Clara's expression, told him what Vera had said in those last days. Felix put on his magnifying headset and turned on the work lamp. He didn't say anything for a long time, just examined the case, the crown, the hinge line around the back cover, the thickness of the base plate. Then he reached for a very thin tool that looked like a dental pick. "The base is wrong," he said finally. "Standard movement like this, the base plate is maybe 1.5 millimeters. This one is closer to 4. He pressed the pick into what looked like a decorative groove at the edge. There was a soft resistance, and then a click, and the entire base plate swung outward on a tiny hinge, revealing a hidden space lined with a piece of old chamois leather. Inside were 2 documents in sealed plastic sleeves, and a folded letter in Vera's handwriting. Felix removed them with cotton-gloved hands and held the first document under the light. His face went pale. He set it down carefully and looked at me. "Howard," he said, "sit down, please." The document was a share certificate. Herrenfield Properties Limited, Certificate of Founding Equity, 20% common shares, dated March 2009. Vera's signature at the bottom, witnessed and notarized. Registered in trust for Clara Whitfield. The second document was a copy of a shareholder agreement. In 2009, my son's first development company had been a single-room operation in a Burnaby industrial park. No bank would touch him. He was 31, no track record, no assets, nothing but blueprints and conviction. Vera had written him a check for $150,000. Her own money, 40 years of nursing wages, saved in a separate account I'd barely known about. Money she'd always said was for emergencies. She'd told my son it was a loan, but she'd registered it as equity. Felix opened his laptop and typed for a few minutes. Then he turned it toward me. Herrenfield Properties was absorbed into West Coast Capital Developments in 2017. My son's current company, the amalgamation documents filed with BC Corporate Registry, listed my son as the sole equity holder of all transferred assets. No mention of Vera's 20%. No mention of Clara. West Coast Capital sold a major mixed-use tower in Surrey to a Hong Kong investment group in 2021 for $85 million. Felix's calculator showed the number before I could do the arithmetic myself. 20% of $85 million is $17 million. My son had absorbed Vera's stake, declared himself the sole owner, and sold the company. Clara's inheritance, $17 million, had disappeared into my son's accounts, and Vera had already been dead by the time the sale closed. I held onto the workbench with both hands. Felix didn't say anything. He knew when to be quiet. When I could speak, I unfolded Vera's letter. Her handwriting was smaller than it used to be. The medication had made her hands unsteady by then, but every word was clear. "My darling Clara, the shares in this watch are registered in your name. They belong to you, not to your father. I invested in his dream when he was young and frightened and too proud to ask for help. I didn't tell him how I registered it because I wanted him to succeed without feeling like I was holding something over him. I believed he would do the right thing when the time came. If your grandfather is giving you this watch, it means the time has come and your father didn't. I'm sorry for that. I wanted to be wrong about him. The money is yours to build a life your father can't control. Use it for what matters. Don't let anyone tell you what that is. All my love, always Gran." I read it twice, then I folded it carefully and held it in both hands for a while, the way she used to hold the watch. "She knew," I said. "She knew," Felix agreed. "Monica Reyes has a practice on Burrard Street in a building that smells like carpet and quiet authority. Felix had recommended her years ago when Vera first started talking about her estate, the best elder law barrister in Vancouver, he'd said, and the only one who actually returns calls. She's 52, silver-haired, with the kind of stillness that comes from having heard every version of every human disaster and not being surprised by any of them. I sat across from her the following morning, with the documents spread across her desk. She read everything without speaking. Then she opened her laptop and typed for several minutes while I drank the worst coffee I'd ever had and watched the rain against the window. "The share certificates are legitimate," she said. "Notarized, witnessed, and registered with BC Corporate Registry. The trust designation for Clara is legally sound. Your son had full access to the corporate records when he filed the amalgamation. He knew these shares existed." She looked up. "What he did when he amalgamated Heronfield into West Coast Capital, without disclosing the outstanding equity, violates the Business Corporations Act and constitutes fraud. The fact that he then sold the company without making Clara whole makes it significantly worse." I asked what we could do. "Everything. But we need to move carefully." She turned her laptop toward me. "Your son is already under review by the BC Securities Commission for misrepresenting equity positions to investors in his current projects. This isn't his first time doing this. He just hasn't been caught this directly before." I sat with that for a moment. My son had been doing this to other people as well. Vera had simply been the one who left evidence behind. "He'll come after me," I said. Monica nodded. "The moment he realizes you have these documents, he will. Men in his position always attack the messenger rather than face the message." I didn't have to wait long to find out what that looked like. The petition arrived on a Thursday by registered mail. My son was applying for an adult guardianship order under BC's Adult Guardianship Act, citing concerns about my cognitive decline and my ability to manage my own affairs. The attached psychiatric assessment from a Dr. Novak described memory lapses, disorientation, and what the doctor called a concerning fixation on antique objects and past relationships inconsistent with present circumstances. The words were clinical and precise and had nothing to do with me. I was 64 years old. I ran 10 kilometers every other morning along the seawall. I had managed complex infrastructure projects for 35 years. I had never in my life been unable to manage my own affairs. But I also knew that none of that mattered if a judge believed the documentation. I drove to UBC Hospital and made an appointment with a neurologist named Dr. Asha Kamra. Monica had recommended her as the most credible cognitive specialist in BC, someone whose assessments were trusted in every courtroom in the province. 3 hours of testing, pattern recognition, memory recall, spatial reasoning, verbal fluency (MRI). Dr. Kamra reviewed the results the same afternoon and looked at me the way a professional looks at someone when the numbers are not what the other side was hoping for. "Your cognitive function is in the 89th percentile for your age group," she said. "Memory recall is excellent. There is no neurological finding that would support impaired judgment or the need for guardianship. Whoever assessed you to the contrary was either incompetent or paid to be wrong." I suspected the latter. Monica confirmed it the following day. Dr. Novak had received a $40,000 wire transfer from my son's personal account 4 days before filing his report. The investigator Monica referred me to was a former RCMP officer named Wade Sinclair, who worked from a small office above a Portuguese bakery in East Vancouver. He had the unhurried manner of a man who had learned that most people tell you more than they intend to if you give them enough silence. He slid a folder across the table on a Friday afternoon. "Your son booked 3 one-way tickets to Hong Kong 2 weeks ago," he said. "Cathay Pacific, business class. Your son, your granddaughter, and a woman named Priya Sethi." I asked who she was. 29, junior associate at a real estate law firm in Gastown. They've been seeing each other for 7 months. She has family in Hong Kong and dual citizenship. He paused. Hong Kong has an extradition treaty with Canada, but custody disputes and financial fraud matters are significantly more complicated to pursue once assets and children are there. My son was planning to take Clara out of the country, not out of love. Wade had found the text messages to prove that. My son had written to this woman that Clara had a trust registered in her name that would pay out at 25, and that having physical custody until then was worth the inconvenience. He had used the word inconvenience. His daughter, 8 years old. Wade also gave me a second folder. Clara's school records from West Vancouver Elementary. The counselor had been making notes for nearly 2 years. Clara arrived Monday mornings quiet and tense. She had developed a stutter in the second term that wasn't there the year before. She had twice asked the counselor whether it was normal to feel scared of someone you also loved. There was security footage from the lobby of my son's building. Clara arriving from school, her father meeting her at the elevator. The audio was clear. She'd shown him a painting from art class, a watercolor of the mountains that her teacher had put on the classroom wall. My son looked at it for 3 seconds. "You should be practicing your French, not painting pictures. I'm not paying for French immersion so you can be an artist." The elevator doors opened and he walked ahead without waiting for her. Clara stood in the lobby for a moment, painting in hand, and then followed him in alone. I watched that video twice. Each time I thought about every parent-teacher interview Vera had attended while my son was in meetings. About the way Clara always relaxed the moment she was with her grandmother. About the things Vera had seen that I'd told myself weren't as serious as they looked. My late wife had known. She had seen what was coming, and she had spent her last year building a way out for the child she loved most. My son called on a Sunday evening. I put it on speaker. "I'm filing the guardianship petition because I'm worried about you," he said. "You're not well, Dad. People at the party noticed. You were agitated, confused, carrying that old watch around like it was something valuable." I said I wasn't confused about anything. "You're 64 years old and you live alone, and you're making decisions that don't make sense." His voice shifted into something softer, more practiced. "There are excellent facilities in North Van. Nice places, not hospitals. You'd have people around you. Mom would have wanted you to be looked after." I thought about Vera on the night she died, the watch in her hands. This watch holds more than time, Howard. I thought about Clara in that lobby with her painting. "Don't talk to me about what your mother would have wanted," I said. The softness left his voice entirely. "You have something that belongs to the company, documents that were filed in error. I need you to hand them over and stop speaking to lawyers. If you don't, I'll make sure this guardianship process takes years. You'll spend every dollar you have defending yourself." A pause. "This doesn't have to be a fight. Just give me the documents, and we'll call it settled." I asked him what he'd done with the $150,000 his mother had trusted him with. The line was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was completely flat. "You're making a very serious mistake." He hung up. Monica's paralegal had recorded every word. My daughter-in-law called 2 days later and met me at a cafe in Lonsdale Quay. She arrived without sunglasses and looked like someone who'd been awake for several nights. She told me my son had said he was taking Clara on an extended work trip. She had found the one-way tickets in his email. She had found his mistress's name in his phone. She slid her phone across the table, screenshots of texts, bank transfer records she'd photographed from his home office. Everything Wade had found, and a few things he hadn't. She wanted to be seen as cooperative by the court. She admitted she hadn't been the mother Clara deserved, but said she was willing to change. I looked at this woman who had stood next to my son for 8 years, while Clara grew quieter and more careful around them both. I told her that if she testified honestly and handed over everything she had, I would ensure the court knew she had cooperated. I couldn't promise her more than that. She gave me everything. The guardianship hearing was at BC Supreme Court on Smythe Street. My son arrived with 2 lawyers and the confidence of a man who had always believed that money buys outcomes. Dr. Camera's report came in first. Superior cognitive function, 89th percentile. No findings supporting impairment. Dr. Novak's paid assessment was dismantled in cross-examination within 20 minutes. His payment records were submitted into evidence. His credential history in Alberta, including 2 previous professional conduct complaints, entered the record. Monica submitted the share certificates, the shareholder agreement, the amalgamation filings, the sale records, Vera's letter to Clara. She submitted the BC Securities Commission review file, recently expanded to include West Coast Capital's equity misrepresentation in the 2021 sale. She submitted the security footage from my son's building lobby, Clara's school counselor notes, 31 months of careful documentation, the one-way tickets to Hong Kong, the text messages about Clara being worth the inconvenience. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with a reputation Monica had described as someone who had spent her career watching children disappear through courtroom cracks, looked at my son for a long time after all of it had been submitted. She dismissed the guardianship petition. She referred the matter to the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit and the BC Securities Commission. She issued an emergency order prohibiting my son from removing Clara from the province. She turned to me and said, in the quiet tone of someone making a decision that matters, "We'll be scheduling a custody determination as expedient as possible, Mr. Whitfield. In the meantime, I want Clara placed with family." Clara came home to North Vancouver that same evening. She stood in the doorway of my house on Larson Road, a small person with her grandmother's steady eyes and a backpack half her size, and looked at the living room as though she was memorizing it. "Is this where I'm staying?" she asked. "For as long as you need," I said. She walked to the mantel where I'd set the pocket watch in its open case, the hidden compartment visible, Vera's letter folded beside it. "Gran put things in there," she said. It wasn't a question. She did. For me, for you. Clara touched the edge of the watch case very gently with one finger. Then she sat down on the floor in front of the fireplace, the way she'd always done when she was very small. And I made us both tea and didn't say anything about the fact that she cried for a little while before she stopped. The family court hearing came 6 weeks later. My daughter-in-law testified. The school counselor testified. Felix testified to my character and my mind. 30 years of knowing me, he said, and I had never once been confused about anything that mattered. Clara's court-appointed guardian reported that my granddaughter had expressed a clear and consistent wish. She wanted to live with her grandfather. She used the word safe 3 times in 3 separate sessions. She said she knew her grandfather kept his promises because he had kept the watch safe, even when nobody else thought it mattered. My son did not attend. He was in a meeting with his criminal lawyers. The judge awarded me full custody. My daughter-in-law was granted supervised visits, monthly, with a review at 6 months. The conditions were not punitive. They were simply what Clara needed right now. Outside on the courthouse steps in the thin December sun, I put my hands in my coat pockets and found the watch where I'd put it that morning. I'd been carrying it every day since Gastown. I thought about Vera, about the 7 months she'd had after the diagnosis, and what she'd chosen to do with them. The careful legal language, the hidden compartment, the letter written in handwriting that was smaller and shakier than it used to be. She had been dying, and she had spent her energy building a way out for the child she loved, word by word, in a space no bigger than a thumbnail. She hadn't done it because she was afraid. She'd done it because she was paying attention, and paying attention is its own kind of love. Clara is 9 now. She sleeps with a pocket watch on her bedside table. Most nights before she turns off the light she winds it. It still runs. Felix restored the mechanism in January, and she listens to the tick for a while before she puts it down. Some nights she holds it the way Vera used to, both hands, thumb moving across the engraving. She is doing better. She still startles at loud voices in public spaces, and she still apologizes for things that aren't her fault. And some mornings she stands in the kitchen very quietly until I say something first, as though she needs to be sure the day is going to be safe before she steps into it. Monica referred us to a child psychologist who has an office in Deep Cove and a reputation for being the kind of person children will actually talk to. Clara talks to her. I think it's helping. We go to Felix's shop on Saturday afternoons sometimes. He shows Clara how things work, escapements, balance wheels, the way every gear connects to the next, and the whole system either runs or it doesn't, and there's no cheating any of it. Last month she held a movement in her palm and said, "Very seriously, it's like a family, except all the parts actually do their job." Felix laughed so hard he nearly knocked over a tray of mainsprings. The money is in trust, the full $17 million, plus interest and penalties assessed by the court as part of the fraud settlement, administered by Monica under family court supervision until Clara turns 25. We made one decision together before the trust was formally established. Clara's idea, offered at breakfast one morning, as though she'd been thinking about it for days, a fund for single-parent families navigating elder care and custody disputes in BC. $150,000. the exact amount Vera had invested in my son's dream. Clara said, "Grand's money helped Dad start something. We should start something with it too." She looked up from her porridge. "Something that actually helps people." I told her her grandmother would have loved that. "I know," she said. There are evenings now when I sit at the kitchen table where Vera and I ate for 30 years, and I feel something that isn't quite grief and isn't quite peace, but lives somewhere in between. I think about how my wife spent her last months building something I couldn't see, trusting that I would figure out the rest. I think about everything I missed and everything I finally understood too late and everything I still have time to get right. The watch ticks on Clara's bedside table. The mountains are dark beyond the window. The house is quiet the way a house is quiet when the right people are in it. I kept the promise. I just didn't know until the end what the promise had actually been. That's the thing about the people who love you best. They see the whole shape of things long before you do. All you have to do is pick up what they left behind and pay attention.